Ball is definitely in the air. This is class 37 and we get to 43. So we've got today's class, 3 classes next week, and then 3 classes after Thanksgiving. So we're definitely wrapping up. Yeah, that does count dead week. Dead week's just a normal week. It's just a week. So there's nothing special that happens then. The only restriction is I think I'm only allowed to give you an assignment that's worth more than 10% of your grade on dead week as long as it's announced prior to dead week. It's pretty weak restrictions. So anyways, yeah, we're getting close to the end. The project is due next Wednesday. I've had a number of requests from students to meet with me this afternoon or Monday afternoon, and I'm glad to do that. You may have to wait because I think there's several people who are going to be intending to stop by. Also, I'll just put it out there, I'm happy to meet with you over the weekend. If you want to meet with me on Microsoft Teams and show me your spreadsheet and we could chat that way. So send me a message, and if I'm available, then I'll be glad to meet with you. I may be doing other things and maybe it'll take me a while, but I'm open to that. I want to help you. Homework 13 is due the Wednesday after Thanksgiving, and then our final exams the last day, the last time slot of finals, the December 12th time slot. It's a cumulative test. It would be impossible to give a non-cumulative exam simply because the material just naturally builds on itself in this class. So the time value of money is kind of the base layer that everything else is built on. But as I mentioned before, there is proportionally more of the questions and more of the points are going to be on things that were introduced after exam 2. So you will have questions across the entirety of the class, but more of the points will be focused on things you haven't yet had a test on. And you are going to be allowed to bring 3 pages of notes. I think I already told you that I'm also going to do the concept questions as multiple choice. The problem-solving questions will be working it out, but multiple choice concept questions. So I'm still thinking through what that's going to mean, and we'll talk more about it the week after Thanksgiving. So does anybody have any questions related to the announcements? All right, we're going to continue talking about depreciation today. And just as a brief recap, depreciation is related to the loss of value of equipment as it wears out. So why is it that companies like depreciation if it's related to their equipment wearing out? Why do they like depreciation?
Tax write-offs.
Tax write-offs, yeah. So let's just be clear. What companies like is tax depreciation. They like the fact that this depreciation which occurs, you quantify how much of it occurs each year, and then that can be counted as an expense. And you only pay tax on your profits. You don't pay tax on your revenue. You pay tax on profits. And so if you have depreciation, that is an expense, and it reduces how much of your income as a company is taxable. So that's why companies want to accelerate depreciation, is it has tax write-off value. Okay, so last time we talked about straight line depreciation and declining balance depreciation. We did some example calculations. Oh, you want me to turn on the screen? All right, I guess I will. Thank you. Yeah, it's always something. Wait a second for that to warm up. I'll also show you the announcement slide since that was on screen the whole time I was talking. Wait for it. Wait for it. All right. All right. Sorry about that. Depreciation. Okay, so modified accelerated cost recovery system is a blend of straight line and declining balance depreciation. And the reason why it's used is because there's less calculations involved. Rather than making companies responsible for doing the calculations that you practiced in class on Wednesday, this system kind of does a lot of the work for you by just providing a table of factors that should be utilized. Now, some of the characteristics of this depreciation system is that unlike declining balance, which always has some residual salvage value, declining balance can't get to zero. Straight line depreciation can, declining balance can't. So the modified accelerated cost recovery system does go to zero. So in each case, regardless of the equipment type, it's depreciating down to a zero balance of book value. Now remember, book value and market value can be completely different things. A piece of equipment may actually last for 20 years, but maybe its depreciation classification says it depreciates over 9. Doesn't matter. We're talking about an accounting system versus reality. In the same way, an item may have residual value that's higher or lower in any given year than its book value. Its book value is just an accounting consideration. So this MACRS depreciation switches from declining balance at first, which has a nice steep slope, and then eventually, about halfway through, it switches over to straight line depreciation. And that's how it gets to zero. And that's why it switches from declining balance to straight line. As if it had stayed as a declining balance system, it would never get to a zero salvage value. It uses standard recovery periods that aren't a matter of interpretation or preference from the company. It's just assigned based on the equipment type. And then here's the strangest thing about it, is the government always knows that people are going to be looking for loopholes and playing games with taxes. And so what they realized is that someone would maybe buy equipment on December 31st and then try and claim a full year of depreciation even though they only owned it for a single day. So they're trying to avoid that, or at least limit the effect of it. And the way that they've done it is called the half-year convention. And what that means is that you don't get to depreciate a full year's worth of depreciation in the first year. The first year that you own the equipment, you only get half a year of depreciation. And their thinking there is that on average, some people are going to buy equipment in the first half of the year, some people are going to buy equipment in the second half of the year, but on average, people buy equipment in the middle of the year. And so they're going to give you a half year's worth of depreciation during your first year. And so then what that means is that you actually depreciate it over n+1 years. And so if some equipment is known to have a depreciable lifespan of 5 years, you'll actually do its depreciation over 6 years. And the first year of the 6 is a half-year fraction, and the last year is half a year of depreciation. So they're basically assuming that equipment gets purchased halfway through the year. So you'll see really quickly, I think, the implication of that when we look at the table in just a moment. So this table just shows the recovery periods. So for example, a bus. GDS is what we'll typically use. The GDS is the typical recovery period classification for MACRS. And so a bus is expected to depreciate over a 5-year period according to that. Now the class life, I think, is more closely aligned to its average useful life. And so, you know, we know that a bus is going to last longer than 5 years, but we allow the depreciation to occur over 5. And I don't know why. It's probably just, you know, the political process, special interests, lobbying and all that, why the recovery period is so much shorter than the class life, because companies want to depreciate as quickly as possible. So the earlier they get their depreciation, the more value that is, because money now is more valuable than money in the future. So you'd look at the equipment that somebody has purchased. Maybe it's equipment having to do with the manufacture of cement. 15-year recovery period. So what that means is that there would actually be 16 years of depreciation, where the first and the last year are just a half share of depreciation. So step 1 is to find out the recovery period that applies, and then step 2 is to apply one of these tables. By the way, you'll notice that all of these recovery periods were odd numbers. That's just, I don't know why, it's just, that's the way it is for GDS. It's always odd numbers. Well, until it isn't. 3, 5, 7, and so on. So for example, the 3-year recovery period has 4 years of recovery because in the first it's a half share and in the last it's a half share. So it's much easier to see how this is all working. Like take the 10-year recovery period as an example. So it's switching from declining balance to straight line about halfway through. And so if you look, these fractions are getting smaller. So this first year is 10% of the overall value is depreciated in that year because that's the half share year. And then in subsequent years, the amount that's depreciating is decreasing, but then it becomes constant. 0.065, 0.065, 0.065. And then the last year is a half share of the constant amount. So they all add up to 1.0. For each of the columns, it adds up to 1.0. But instead of you having to calculate the depreciation amount in each year, you just multiply the basis by this fraction, and then it tells you the depreciation amount for each year. So here's the formulas that show that. The depreciation amount in a given year t is that fraction that you're going to get from the table. So lowercase d, the depreciation rate, which has a decimal to it, you just look it up off the table and you multiply it by the cost basis. And remember, the cost basis includes not only the purchase price and the installation expenses, transportation, and training. So it's basically everything required to get the item in service. That's the cost basis. And then the book value in any given time is just the initial book value minus all of the depreciation that has occurred up till that time. So any questions about the mindset here? All right, pretty simple. Let me give you the handout. We're going to do this simple depreciation problem, and then also, just to kind of wet your whistle for getting ready for the final exam, we're going to do a couple of time value of money review problems. Those are on the back side of the paper. Okay, so for this one, the company spent $34,000. Okay. Let me show you this illustration before we do the in-class exercise, just to show you how this one works. If it is a bus, we'd go here to the bus category. It would be GDS of 5. So we'd use the 5-year column. And then the depreciation amount for each year is the cost basis multiplied by the fraction. So in the handout I've just given you, the problem's slightly different. Let me pull that up, get it on screen. Okay, so the one that we are doing is, it is a copy machine system, and it's 34,700. So what I'd like you to do is look through the table, find out the GDS recovery period, and then go here, and you're going to have to put it into Excel because we want to know the depreciation amount and the book value amount for each year. So at the end of the first year, at the end of the second year, and so on, until you get down to 0 book value. So what it's going to look like if we set this up as a spreadsheet, is you're going to have a table that has the cost basis, and then end of year number 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. So we're just going to find out at the end of each year what is the rate. So this is where you're looking it up off the table. The depreciation amount for that year, and then the book value. So what we know for this equipment that we're working with in this example problem, it's the copy machine system. Its cost basis is $34,700. So what you need to do is figure out the classification, how many years will it go, then transcribe the rate off of the table, and then calculate the depreciation amount and the book value. I'll interject in a few minutes and start going through the solution, but I want you to figure out which asset class this copy machine should be included in of the options that are provided here, the options that are provided on screen there. By the way, let me just interject with one thing. Did you notice that these factors aren't exactly the same? 0.0893, 0.0892, 0.0893. Why do you think it is a little bit different like that?
So that way it goes perfectly to 1.
Yeah, because what we want is it to be exactly 1 at the end. So if we sum all of that, it should be 1.0000 because we want, in the end, the book value to be perfectly 0 as well. So if it had just been 0.093 that many times, then we'd have more than 1 in the end. So they're expressing this to, I guess, 1, 2, 3, 4 digits. And so they alternated like that just so that it gets to the end. And, you know, the depreciation amount is the total value, $34,700. And we see that by it getting to a book value of 0 by the end. All right. And then we've got these time value of money problems. Two. as well. Yeah, you too. So I really think it's a good habit to write the equation and also write the substitutions. Don't try to do too much in your calculator. You want to have it written out as detailed as possible so that you can go through and check a second time. You're going to have a little extra time on the final compared to the normal midterm exams. You'll have enough time that you could double check your work. And if you've got it written out like this with the intermediate calculations, then that gives you just a little bit more confidence in pinpointing the mistake if you've made one. So we've got a certain amount for the purchase price today. That's an outflow. And then you'll sell the truck for $18,500 in 7 years. That's an inflow. So one's a present value, one's a future value. This problem's basically asking you to calculate the capital recovery. And remember what capital recovery is you're annualizing the purchase price, annualizing the salvage value, and then finding the difference between the two. So if we annualize the purchase price of $65,000, that means that the cost is $11,643 when turned into an annual series. That salvage value of $18,500, if you annualize that using the A given F formula, then that's worth $22.04 per year, and then the difference between the two is $94.39 and 78 cents. So once you've got that copied down, you feel like you understand, that's it for today. If you have any questions, I'm going to hang out for a few minutes, let me know. And of course, I'm happy to help you on the project, so you can stop by during my office hours, get in touch for a remote meeting. Just let me know what I can do to help.